Guys, Kyle Cordiani here with Bass Fishing Declassified. I look a little tired because I am. It's 5:30 in the morning. I'm about to hit the road, but hey, I want to take a minute and tell you a quick little tip to help you catch more fish on your topwater baits, more specifically your walking baits. I'm a huge fan of the spook line, the head and spook, the full size one, the rattling spook, the spook junior, and even their boyo is pretty cool. So here is a super spook boyo. I want to make sure I get the name right. It's a little guy, a little compact guy. He's about 3 inches long, and he comes out of there, and they got some cool colors like this bluegill color here that I really like. One little tip that I want to tell you, and you guys probably already know this, is to add a feathered treble hook to your bait. So you'll get a lot more bites if you just take the time to add you a feathered treble hook to that bait. Look how much cooler that looks. You sit there and you walk that spook like a spook walks, and then when you give it a pause, that feathered treble hook bait just sitting in the water, and this will kind of sit like that. That feather will just sit there and wiggle like that, and that will entice a lot more bites. So now you may be thinking that adding that feathered treble hook is going to affect how the bait walks, and it will just a little bit, but I think you're going to get more bites when you pause the walking action of that bait because of the extra flash and the flare and the motion of that feather when the bait's sitting still, that it's worth losing a little bit of the walkability of the bait, but it really doesn't affect it that bad. So if that's a concern of yours, don't worry about it. Trust this tip, you'll get more bites. Again, some of your spooks already come like that. So this is the great big super spook. Some of them will already come with a feather, some of them won't. If they don't, I like this, sometimes they don't. And sometimes not having it on there, it works great and you don't need to do it. But you always want to add a treble feather hook. In my opinion, you're getting a few more bites like that. Get your white, get your chartreuse, take the time to get online, figure out what size hook that you need, and match that up with the bait. Again, here's one that comes without it. This is just the Super Spook Junior. Love this color. Here's another Super Spook Junior. This is the saltwater version, but this clear color works really good a lot of times on herring lakes. It comes with a white feathered hook, and you can see it's not just white. It's got a little bit of green, and it's got some fluorescent chenille in there, or flash. Here's the head and rattling spook. You can see I've caught a lot of fish on this bait. You can see there's even like some blood from a fish on there. So anyway, it's a tiny little trick. You probably already know about it. You think about it, but when you buy your bait, sometimes it doesn't have it. And if it doesn't, just take the time to find you one, buy you several of them, have them in the box. I've got a whole slew of them sitting here just waiting to go to put on the end of my walking bait. So little tip, hopefully helps you guys catch a few more fish. We'll see you guys on the next one.
All right, everybody. So May is one of the best months to start fishing a topwater. Of course, April, they start hitting a topwater pretty good, but May is one of my absolute favorites because there's a lot of things going. You know, you can catch them out deep with a topwater, or you can also catch them shallow with a topwater. And because I'm a shallow water power fisherman at heart, I really prefer fishing some shallow water techniques for bass. And my favorite topwater for skinny water has got to be a frog in May. And the reason for this is, and when I talk about a frog, I'm mostly talking about a hollow body frog, although toads, which are more like finesse buzzbaits, those also work really good. So definitely keep one of those tied on as well. But a hollow body frog is really good this time of year because there's a lot of things going on still up shallow. You know, of course, a lot of the fish have already spawned, so there is a lot of fish offshore, but there's also a couple things that are really important during May, which include the shad spawn and the bluegill spawn. Those two things really play a big role in bass fishing during especially the first 2 weeks of May, depending on the weather leading up to. But both of those things, you know, I recently had a tournament down at Toledo Bend, and the frog was one of my key players for the shad spawn because the shad were spawning around cypress tree knees. And the frog just, number one, it doesn't snag on anything. Number two, I can skip it underneath, you know, overhangs and limbs and be very, very accurate with it. And it also just looks like a shad that's distressed on the surface, that maybe, you know, a bass had busted through a school and one is just kind of, you know, injured and struggling on the surface. And then the other spawn, the bluegill spawn, that's really important. A frog does extremely well at imitating bluegill too. As you can see with this frog right here, this is the Z-Man Leaf Frogs. This is the walk-in version. This is actually the 2.25, which is so 2¼ inch one. They also make a 2.75. Both of them work great. Just kind of match the hatch. But this one right here, you can see it has this nice pale belly, a little yellow chin on it, and then also has this brown and like green pumpkin and chartreuse tail on it. That imitates a bluegill very, very well. If you look up shallow, you'll see a lot of panfish that have chartreuse tails. They have these bright yellow chartreuse tails on them, and a lot of frogs do imitate that very well. Not only that, and as far as the color, but as far as like the places that you're going to be fishing them, where the bluegill are spawning, and also the way that bluegill act distressed on the surface, a frog does a really, really good job at imitating that type of bait fish, and you can catch a lot of fish on those two different types of spawn. So the places I like to throw the frog, obviously, if you see a shad spawn going or you have a bluegill bed, locked down and you know where to cast, that's great. But other place to consider, really, a frog is really good when you've got that high water condition where the lake rises to meet the limbs that are coming over the water. So, a lot of lakes this time of year, especially here on the TVA, we have low water the rest of the year. So those trees and those shrubs that are right on the shoreline, they're really not casting a whole lot of shade on the water during the earlier months, but during the May and throughout the summer, when the water meets those leaves and those limbs, casts a lot of shadows. And a frog is a really good presentation to skip underneath those and walk out. So primarily this time of year, I'm going to be using a light frogging setup, which and when I say light, I'm not talking about, real light. You're not using a light action or a medium action rod. You're still going to be using heavy tackle, but it's not quite as beefy as when I fish a frog over a grass mat, thick vegetation. So I like to use a 7.3 heavy action all-purpose series rod. I like the heavy. I don't like the extra heavy as much. Heavy just seems to be perfect. It gives you the right amount of flex in the tip for accuracy, but also gives you enough strength to really get a good solid hook set. The line that I like to use Seaguar Tactics. I like this braid for casting applications, and I use anywhere from 30 to 40 pound test braid, depending on how long I need to cast, but also how dense the cover is. That's probably the more important factor. If I'm fishing real dense vegetation, I'll go up to 50 pound test or even 65. But for just casting underneath, overhangs and in open water, 30 and 40, perfect. And then I use a high speed gear ratio reel. This is the 8.1 to 1 gear ratio VLD10. And that's just for efficiency and just being able to reel it in real quick and make another cast. But in any case, the frog is one of the best baits to use this time of year during May.
Really quick, if you guys enjoy the content in this video and want more personalized instruction, head to our website, fishthemoment.com. Then go to the virtual lessons page. Here you can book one-on-one virtual lessons with each member of the Fish the Moment team. In these 1-hour lessons, the Fish the Moment team member will break down your lake using Google Earth and a contour line map and answer any questions you have. Whether you're preparing for an upcoming fishing tournament or a fun weekend on the lake, make sure you sign up for one of these one-on-one virtual lessons so you're fully prepared to catch as many fish as possible on the water. Check them out at fishthemoment.com.
Fishing during the post-spawn is one of my favorite times to fish, and it has to do with the fact that the fish are up shallow, they're starting to get aggressive, there's usually a shad spawn going on depending where you're at in the country, and in reality what that means is you get to throw a topwater. To me, fishing topwaters is one of the absolute best ways to catch a bass. If you live up here in the northern part of the world like I do, the post-spawn period is every bit as good as any other part of the country. We don't have shad, but we do have bluegill. And as soon as the bass finish spawning, you get the bluegill come in, start forming their beds, and therefore the bass take a little bit of advantage of the bluegill, and they go to town on an easy meal. So if you want to mimic the bluegill really well, you need to be throwing a topwater One of my favorites is this little Chapo right here by Berkeley in the Ghost Bluegill color. An absolute killer for me anytime I'm fishing during the post spawn. So generally speaking, that's going to be like middle of May into middle of June. You've got a lot of fish that are still up shallow. If they're not necessarily keying in on bluegill, they're going to be guarding a lot of their fry, and therefore the bluegill that are coming in and feeding on the fry are going to be eaten by the bass. And again, that's why this little guy catches them. The other thing I want to point out too is a lot of times you're talking about trying to cover a lot of water because the fish are going to be spread out. They're still going to be close to their spawning areas, but they may not be directly in the exact area where the beds were, but they're going to be in those shallow flats. So you're talking about covering a lot of water, making a lot of casts over a bunch of flats where you may have some new grass growth coming in. Ideally, you've got a little bit of scattered rock or some sand mixed in, so you've got a bunch of transitions on that flat. And those fish are going to be scattered all across it. At the same time, if you're going down the bank, you're going to be looking for a lot of that first area where you get a little bit of deep water. So if you've got a shallow spawning bay, maybe a shallow pad-filled bay, those fish are going to start transitioning out to the first deep shoreline that's just out from that. And again, that's where a topwater bait can be a really, really good bait. Now, we're not talking just largemouth. There's a lot of smallmouth up here. The smallmouth are going to be roaming on those shallow flats too. You're going to be looking at probably anywhere from 4 to 14 feet of water, but they are every bit as aggressive as the largemouth, and they're going to be coming up from deeper water to hit a topwater bait. And again, that's where the Chapo comes in handy. You can cover a lot of water, you make a lot of noise, so you got a lot of draw power. Those smallmouth are going to be aggressive, they're going to be willing to come up, and a lot of times when you're talking about chasing smallmouth, you're going to be fishing clear water. So if you're in 14 feet of water, don't be afraid to throw a topwater bait, because that will draw the smallmouth up, and a lot of times you get more action out of your topwater baits during the post spawn than you will from some of your traditional smallmouth baits. They just seem like they're more aggressive, more willing to come up and hit something that's on the surface versus that slow moving Ned rig or a drop shot bait that they're so accustomed to. So don't think just because it's the post spawn, the bass are going to be in a funk. It's one of the funnest times to fish. Put a topwater bait on, get out there and catch some bass.